Welcome to Top 10 Secret, where the darkest mysteries are unveiled. In the damp darkness of forgotten dungeons, where rusted chains rattle with every desperate struggle of something, no longer human, an ancient curse waits for the moment of awakening. And today, we open the door to the top most terrifying stories about the wrath of the Bound One, where vengeful spirits tear through the shadows, horrifying secrets lie buried, and nightmares will haunt you forever. Don't turn off the lights, don't be alone, and most importantly, don't let something touch you from behind. Story 1. The Wrath of the Bound One. In the desolate expanse known as Korath's Vale, a land draped in perpetual twilight, few dare to tread. It is a cursed place where the wind carries the faint scent of ash and decay, and the earth is cracked and lifeless. At its heart lies a shadowed ruin, once a grand kingdom now overtaken by despair. Those who dare speak of its fate tell the tale of the Bound One, a figure wrapped in cursed bandages inscribed with glyphs of unimaginable power. His crimson eyes pierce the gloom, glowing with a hatred that has festered for centuries. They say his presence chills the air, draining all warmth and life, leaving only the echoes of screams etched into the cursed glyphs that bind him. Korath's Vale was not always a wasteland. Long ago, it was a kingdom of unmatched splendor, its people thriving under the rule of King Tainor, a man known for his ambition and cunning. The streets of Korath bustled with life, filled with merchants selling exotic goods and artisans showcasing their craft. Seasonal festivals brought the kingdom together, with vibrant processions winding through the streets and melodies from lyres and flutes echoing across the hills. The people revered the land and its bounty, holding sacred rituals to honor the gods of the harvest. Grand temples adorned with intricate carvings and gilded altars stood as testaments to the kingdom's devotion, while the royal palace shimmered atop a hill, its spires piercing the heavens. Villagers shared tales of prosperity and unity, never imagining the darkness that would one day consume their home. At the center of the kingdom's prosperity were the scrolls of eternity, ancient artifacts said to be gifted by the gods. These scrolls held the power to seal away malevolent spirits, ensuring peace and harmony. The kingdom's priests guarded the scrolls, warning that their misuse would bring ruin. But such warnings were lost on Tainor. As the years passed, Tainor grew obsessed with his legacy. Haunted by the shadows of his ancestors who had faded into obscurity, he feared the same fate awaited him. Every night, he was plagued by dreams of his kingdom crumbling to dust, its once vibrant banners torn and forgotten. These visions gnawed at his sanity, planting seeds of desperation. Though his advisors urged patience and faith in the gods, Tainor's heart burned with the desire to defy mortality. The whispers of forbidden knowledge became an irresistible siren call, and he delved into ancient texts that spoke of eternal life. His ambition turned to arrogance as he convinced himself that only he could preserve Korath's glory, even if it meant bargaining with powers that no mortal should invoke. Whispered rumors spoke of a sorcerer named Malric, an outcast who had mastered the dark arts. Desperate and blinded by ambition, Tainor summoned Malric to the palace. The sorcerer promised Tainor immortality, but his price was steep. The king must submit to a ritual that would bind his soul to the scrolls of eternity, merging his essence with their divine power. The ritual was conducted on a moonless night, deep within the palace's inner sanctum. Tainor stood bare-chested before an altar, his body prepared with sacred oils. Malric began the incantations, his voice echoing with a sinister resonance. Priests bound the king with bandages inscribed with the sacred glyphs of the scrolls, each symbol glowing faintly as the magic took hold. The room grew heavy with a dark energy, the air vibrating with a low hum that rattled the bones. As the final incantation was spoken, a horrific change overtook the king. The glyphs, meant to protect, began to writhe like living things, slithering and twisting across his skin as though alive. A searing hiss filled the chamber, the sound of the symbols branding his flesh with unnatural heat. The air grew thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh, and the dim light from the candles flickered wildly as though recoiling from the horror. Tainer's screams echoed through the stone walls, raw and guttural, his voice cracking as his body convulsed. The priests gasped in terror, some falling to their knees in prayer while others fled the chamber, their footsteps drowned out by the deafening hum of dark energy. The glyphs glowed brighter, their movements erratic, as if feeding on his agony, until the room was filled with an oppressive red light that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. Tainer screamed as the bandages tightened, fusing with his body. The sorcerer's laughter filled the chamber as he revealed his betrayal. The ritual was not one of immortality, but of eternal torment. Tainer's soul was bound to the scrolls, but instead of granting him life, it transformed him into a monstrous warden of death. His body twisted and gnarled under the bandages, his crimson eyes igniting with unholy fire. He reached out to Malric, but the sorcerer fled, leaving the king to writhe in agony. The glyph's power corrupted the land, turning Korath's fertile fields into a barren wasteland. The kingdom's people fled in terror as shadows consumed their homes, and the once proud kingdom crumbled into ruin. Korath's Vale became a place of death and despair. The Bound One's wrath knew no bounds. His bandages, animated by the glyph's cursed magic, acted as tendrils that ensnared those who ventured too close. The glyphs burned their screams into his wrappings, trapping their souls for eternity. The veil itself became a labyrinth of shifting shadows and whispers, disorienting travelers and luring them to their doom. Legends tell of a fog that rolls in without warning, carrying with it the faint scent of burnt parchment and the sound of rustling bandages. Those who encounter the Bound One describe a towering figure whose every movement is accompanied by the faint glow of the glyphs and a suffocating cold that saps all strength and hope. The scholar's hubris. One of the first accounts of the Bound One comes from Lyric Varnal, a historian obsessed with uncovering the secrets of the scrolls of eternity. She journeyed into the Vale, dismissing the warnings of locals as mere superstition. Her journal, found years later, details her descent into madness. "The glyphs," she wrote, "move like serpents, whispering truths I dare not repeat. His eyes, they see through me, into the core of my being." Her final entry reads, "He offered me release, but the price is my soul." Lyric was never seen again, but her journal was discovered wrapped in a fragment of cursed bandage, still warm to the touch. The warriors fall. A mercenary named Gareth Thornblade led an expedition into Korath's Vale, hoping to loot the ruins of the palace. His arrogance proved his undoing. His companions reported hearing faint weeping and feeling an unnatural chill before they were attacked. Gareth's body was found days later, impaled on a throne of twisted bandages, his lifeless eyes glowing faintly with the same crimson light as the Bound Ones. The village sacrifice. Desperate to protect themselves from the creeping desolation of the Vale, a nearby village offered a young woman named Ilara as a sacrifice. She was bound and left at the Vale's edge. Days later, her broken body was found in the village square, her skin inscribed with glowing glyphs. Her lips moved soundlessly, and her eyes burned crimson before she disintegrated into ash. That night, the village was consumed by a fog, leaving no trace of its existence. Legends speak of a way to end the Bound One's torment, though it is said to be impossible. It is whispered that the story of his salvation began with the first priests who guarded the scrolls of eternity. They spoke of a prophecy carved into the sacred temple walls, foretelling that only a soul of pure selflessness could rewrite the cursed glyphs. Over centuries, many have tried and failed to fulfill the prophecy. Tales abound of scholars who ventured into the veil only to be driven mad by the whispers of the glyphs. Warriors wielding enchanted blades have faced the Bound One, their weapons shattering like glass against his wrath. One story tells of a priestess named Alira who reached the scrolls but was unable to complete the ritual, her final cries etched forever into the cursed bandages. Each failure has only deepened the legend, adding to the aura of fear and hopelessness surrounding the task. Despite these tales, some believe the prophecy still holds a sliver of truth, waiting for the right soul to brave the horrors of the veil and free the warden from his eternal torment. To free his soul, one must enter the palace and find the uncorrupted scrolls of eternity, hidden deep within the ruins. These scrolls hold the original glyphs, capable of rewriting the curse. The ritual requires confronting the Bound One directly and carving the new glyphs into his bandages while he remains conscious. The path to the scrolls is fraught with peril. The ruins are said to shift, trapping intruders in endless corridors. Ghostly echoes of the kingdom's former inhabitants haunt the halls, their wails disorienting and maddening. Even if the scrolls are recovered, the act of rewriting the glyphs demands a sacrifice of life force, requiring the one performing the ritual to give up their own soul. To this day, the Bound One roams Korath's Vale, a harbinger of despair. His crimson eyes glow like distant embers in the fog, and the faint rustling of his bandages signals his approach. Nearby villages have learned to coexist with the threat, performing nightly rituals to ward off his presence. Each night, as the sun sets and the fog begins to creep from the edges of Korath's Vale, villagers gather in their squares, lighting protective pyres of sage and juniper. They carve intricate symbols into their doorframes and scatter salt in a circle around their homes, believing these barriers to repel the cursed warden. Children are taught lullabies that double as prayers, their soft voices mingling with the crackling of the fires. During harvest festivals, offerings of bread, wine, and flowers are left at the edge of the veil, an attempt to placate the Bound One. Even so, tales persist of glowing eyes in the distance and whispers carried on the wind, reminding them that no amount of ritual can truly guarantee safety. They hang talismans of blessed parchment at their doorways and burn incense made from sacred herbs, hoping to appease the cursed warden. Yet, despite their efforts, stories of disappearances and eerie phenomena persist. Travelers report seeing shadows that move against the wind and hearing whispers that promise secrets too tempting to resist. Some claim that on nights of the blood moon, the Bound One's voice can be heard echoing through the veil, reciting the incantation that damned him. The legend of the Bound One endures, a chilling reminder of the cost of hubris and the dangers of tampering with forces beyond comprehension. His cursed bandages carry the weight of countless souls, their torment echoing in the winds that sweep through Korath's Vale. And as long as he endures, the land remains barren, the shadows restless, and the cries of the damned unending. Story 2. The Mourner of Rosethorn Hollow. Rosethorn Hollow was once a place of life and beauty, nestled between lush green hills and kissed by sunlight that made its gardens shimmer like a treasure trove of color. Villagers bustled about the cobblestone streets, their laughter mingling with the melodic chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Children played among the flower beds, their hands stained with the vibrant hues of petals. The air was perfumed with the sweet aroma of blooming roses, mingled with the faint scent of freshly baked bread wafting from the village bakery. Farmers tended to their crops in fields that seemed to stretch endlessly, while merchants filled the marketplace with vibrant chatter and the clinking of coins. Every corner of the village pulsed with life, a testament to the harmony between its people and the land. At its heart stood Edwin Carraway, a gardener whose roses were more than plants. They were the lifeblood of the village. Edwin's blooms graced every wedding, every festival, and even the graves of the dearly departed, a symbol of hope and remembrance. But as vibrant as Rosethorn Hollow once was, its story has since become one of despair, vengeance, and a curse so dark that even the bravest dare not speak its name aloud. The tale begins with Edwin, a gentle soul whose devotion to his garden knew no bounds. But his love for the land would become the seed of a tragedy that turned Rosethorn Hollow into a domain of death. A century ago, a plague swept through Rosethorn Hollow. It began innocently enough. A single villager fell ill, their skin turning ashen and their breath rattling in their chest. But within days, the sickness spread like wildfire, sparing neither child nor elder. Edwin watched helplessly as his friends and family succumbed one by one. Desperate to save what remained of his village, he turned to a forbidden text, a relic gifted to him by a passing scholar long ago. The book spoke of rituals that could harness the energy of life itself, channeling it through natural conduits like plants. On the night of a blood moon, Edwin carried out the ritual with trembling hands and a heart heavy with desperation. The sky above was painted in shades of crimson, casting an eerie glow over the hollow. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the air felt charged with a foreboding energy, crackling like distant thunder. Edwin prepared the sacred space in the center of his garden, encircling himself with petals from his prized roses and whispering ancient incantations learned from the forbidden text. He pricked his finger with a thorn, letting his blood drip onto the roots of the roses as he chanted words that seemed to vibrate with otherworldly power. The wind picked up, swirling around him with whispers that sounded like 1,000 voices. The ground beneath his feet trembled as the roses began to glow faintly, their petals shimmering with an unnatural light. The scent of the blooms turned cloyingly sweet, almost suffocating, as the ritual reached its climax. Edwin's voice cracked as he uttered the final invocation, the garden erupting in a dazzling display of light and shadow. For a moment, he felt hope. But then the light faded, leaving only silence and an unsettling stillness that seemed to foreshadow the tragedy to come. He pricked his finger and let his blood drip onto the roots of his roses, chanting incantations that echoed in the still night. The garden responded immediately, the roses blooming with unnatural vibrance, their petals shimmering as if kissed by starlight. But the village elders, already consumed by fear and grief, saw the transformation as a sign of witchcraft. When the plague did not abate, their suspicions turned to rage. Convinced Edwin had cursed the land to fuel his unnatural blooms, the villagers dragged him from his home. They bound him to a pyre built from the very roses he had nurtured, their thorns biting into his flesh. As the flames consumed him, Edwin's screams turned into words, a curse spat through blood and ash. "You burn me for saving you, yet you will never escape what I've done. For every rose you see, another will fall. This land will mourn forever." The very night Edwin's ashes scattered into the wind, a thick fog descended upon Rosethorn Hollow. The vibrant gardens withered into thorny wastelands, their once beautiful roses twisting into grotesque forms. Crops failed, animals fled, and the rivers turned to stagnant pools that reeked of decay. Then came the mourner. Draped in a cloak as black as midnight, his face forever hidden beneath a hood, he emerged from the swirling mists like a shadow given form. His arrival was heralded by an unnatural silence. The chirping of crickets ceased, the rustling of leaves stilled, and even the distant howls of wolves faded into nothingness. Villagers who glimpsed him described an otherworldly presence, the faint glow of his crimson roses casting an eerie light on the ground. The air grew cold as he passed, and the faint scent of decay followed in his wake. Some claimed to hear soft weeping emanating from beneath his hood, while others swore his skeletal hand would reach out to offer a single rose to his chosen victim. The villagers watched in terrified silence, too afraid to breathe, as their nightmares took shape before their very eyes. The flowers glowed faintly, their petals trembling as though alive. For every petal that fell, a life was claimed. The deaths were never merciful. Some were found drowned in the stagnant rivers, their lungs filled with black water, while others perished in violent accidents or mysterious illnesses. And always, a single rose would appear at the site of their death, its petals stained with blood. The mourner's curse extended beyond the hollow. Nearby villages began to suffer unexplained misfortunes. Travelers who dared to pass through the hollow never returned, or worse, returned only to die within days, their bodies entwined with thorny vines that seemed to grow from within. Over the years, countless tales of the mourner's victims have been whispered in fear, each more chilling than the last. The carpenter's curse tells of Elias Moore, a skilled artisan who claimed he could outwit the mourner. One night, he spotted the cloaked figure standing outside his workshop, a single glowing rose resting on his doorstep. Dismissing it as a foolish trick, Elias burned the flower and continued his work. By dawn, his hands were twisted and gnarled, as if the thorns of 1,000 roses had pierced his flesh. Unable to hold a chisel again, Elias vanished into the hollow, leaving behind only a trail of bloodied petals. The twins' last dance recounts the tale of Alina and Mara, inseparable sisters known for their joyful dances during village festivals. They ignored warnings to avoid the hollow and ventured into the fog for a dare. Days later, villagers found their lifeless bodies entwined in a grotesque waltz, their hands clutching wilting roses. The sound of faint music still haunts the place where they were discovered. The mayor's reckoning tells of Alden Graves, the village leader who tried to rally the people against the mourner. Alden declared he would face the spectral figure himself and marched into the hollow armed with fire and steel. The villagers heard his screams that night, and the next morning, Alden's body was found impaled on a twisted rosebush, his mouth filled with petals. A single rose grew from his heart, its thorns etched with faint runes of despair. The Widow and the Rose. Martha Greaves, a widow from a neighboring village, claimed to have seen the mourner standing at the edge of her field one misty evening. He held out a rose to her, its petals dripping with crimson dew. She refused to take it, slamming her door shut and praying for morning. But when dawn broke, her body was found lifeless in her bed, a single rose resting on her chest, its petals soaking in a pool of blood. The Merchant's Folly. A merchant seeking a shortcut ignored the warnings of locals and ventured into Rosethorn Hollow. That night, he heard weeping outside his tent. When he emerged, he saw the mourner standing in the fog, his roses glowing faintly. Laughing off the encounter as a trick of the mind, the merchant plucked one of the roses and tossed it aside. By morning, his body was found twisted and broken, the rose clutched in his hand. The Scholar's Obsession. A historian named Dr. Alaric Venner was drawn to the legend of Rosethorn Hollow. Determined to uncover the truth, he entered the cursed land and began documenting his findings. His journal describes spectral apparitions and whispers in the fog, but his final entry reads, "He came to me tonight. His roses glowed like embers, and his voice was like the wind through a graveyard. He offered me a rose, and now I know there is no escape." Dr. Venner's journal was found years later, buried beneath a rose bush that had grown from his remains. Legends speak of a way to break the mourner's curse, though the details are murky and fraught with danger. To sever the bond between the roses and death, one must willingly take the mourner's bouquet and carry it to the sacred grove where Rosethorn's first garden was planted. There, the roses must be burned in a fire fueled by pure intentions, a promise of love, forgiveness, or redemption strong enough to counter the curse's darkness. But the task is perilous. The grove is said to be guarded by thorny sentinels, monstrous vines that ensnare and devour intruders. The mourner himself is not a passive observer. He appears to those who attempt the ritual, his skeletal hand reaching out to claim their souls. Many who have tried to break the curse have vanished, their screams lost in the hollow's eternal fog. To this day, the mourner roams Rosethorn Hollow, his bouquet a symbol of sorrow and vengeance. Nearby villages live in constant fear of the hollow, their daily lives shaped by rituals and precautions meant to ward off the curse. Elders instruct children never to speak the mourner's name, lest it summon his presence. During the harvest moon, villagers hang wreaths of wildflowers and garlic at their doorways and scatter salt around their homes to repel his approach. Some light candles in their windows, believing the warm glow keeps his cold shadow at bay. Others conduct solemn ceremonies at the village square, offering prayers and burning herbs to purify the air. Despite these measures, stories of faint weeping drifting from the hollow's edge and sightings of glowing roses in the distance persist, a grim reminder that the mourner's influence stretches far beyond the cursed land. On nights when the fog thickens and the moon hides its face, travelers claim to hear his footsteps, soft and deliberate, accompanied by the faint rustling of petals. His presence is a chilling reminder that some curses are not easily broken, and some wounds never heal. Rosethorn Hollow remains a land of desolation, a place where the air itself seems to mourn. The mourner's legend endures, haunting the hearts of those who hear it. And as long as his roses continue to bloom, the curse will live on, spreading sorrow with every petal that falls. For those who dare to enter the hollow, the warning is clear. Beware the mourner and his roses, for to see him is to invite death. And when the last petal falls, it is said, the land itself will die, leaving only the mourner to wander the ashes of his vengeance forever. Story 3. The Veiled One of Gorath Hollow. Deep within the forgotten region known as Gorath Hollow lies a land where even the bravest souls dare not tread. The air is thick with the acrid stench of burning wood and rotting leaves, mingling with a faint metallic tang that clings to the back of the throat. The faint crackle of unseen flames echoes through the hollow, accompanied by a low, mournful wail that seems to emanate from the very earth itself. Shadows stretch unnaturally across the ashen ground, flickering as though alive, while the occasional creak of ancient trees breaking under invisible weight punctuates the oppressive silence. Each step into Gorath Hollow feels like a descent into another world, one where the boundaries between the living and the dead have long since dissolved. Its skies are perpetually shrouded in swirling mists of ash and ember, and the air carries an oppressive weight that chokes the breath of all who enter. At the heart of this cursed wasteland stands the ruined shrine of Elandris, a forsaken deity whose wrath lingers like an open wound upon the earth. But it is not the desolation of Gorath Hollow that chills the blood of travelers. It is the presence of the Veiled One, a spectral figure wreathed in shadows and flames, whose skeletal visage has become the embodiment of despair. The legend of the Veiled One has grown over centuries, whispered in taverns and around campfires as a cautionary tale of hubris, desecration, and eternal damnation. His story is one of betrayal, vengeance, and a curse that binds him to Gorath Hollow for eternity. Before he became a wraith of fire and shadow, Caelor Dreven was a name spoken with equal parts reverence and fear. A celebrated general in the War of the Red Crescent, Kaelor was known for his tactical brilliance and unmatched ruthlessness. Villages fell like dominoes before his armies, their populations slaughtered or enslaved to fuel his conquests. To Kaelor, victory was a divine right, and the gods themselves were mere pawns in his grand design. When Kaelor's forces marched upon the village of Gorath, they discovered the shrine of Elandris hidden deep within the forested hollow. The shrine was an ancient structure, its walls adorned with intricate carvings of celestial beings and sigils radiating a faint golden glow. The villagers, protectors of the shrine for generations, begged Kaelor to spare it, warning him that its relics were sacred and to disturb them would bring divine retribution. Kaelor, driven by greed and arrogance, dismissed their warnings as the ramblings of superstitious fools. To him, the villagers' pleas were nothing more than desperate attempts to cling to outdated traditions. In Kaelor's mind, power and conquest were the ultimate truths, and anything or anyone standing in his way was irrelevant. As he stood before the shrine, its intricate carvings glowing faintly with divine energy, he felt no fear, only a burning desire to claim its secrets for himself. He saw the relics not as sacred artifacts, but as tools that could be weaponized to cement his legacy as the greatest general in history. The idea that a forgotten deity could challenge his might was laughable, and he took a twisted pleasure in proving the villagers wrong, confident that no divine force would dare oppose his will. He ordered the shrine's treasures to be seized and its protective wards shattered. As his soldiers carried out his commands, the once gentle light of the shrine dimmed, replaced by an ominous crimson glow. That night, a storm unlike any other descended upon Gorath Hollow. The air crackled with energy, and the very ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. As the storm raged, Kaelor's camp was consumed by darkness. Screams echoed through the night as soldiers vanished into the void, their cries abruptly silenced. Kaelor himself stood defiantly before the desecrated altar, but his arrogance turned to dread as a voice, ancient and thunderous, filled the air. "You have defiled the sacred balance," the voice declared. "For your sins, you shall bear the weight of this curse for all eternity." The flames of the camp surged, consuming Kaelor and binding his soul to the hollow. His body, stripped of its flesh, became a skeletal husk cloaked in tattered remnants of his armor and robes. The relics he had desecrated fused with his being, transforming into instruments of torment. Kaelor Dreven was no more. In his place stood the Veiled One, a harbinger of vengeance and despair. Under the shadow of the Veiled One, Gorath Hollow transformed into a realm of perpetual torment. The once thriving villagers, who had lived in harmony with the land, found their lives unraveling as the curse seeped into every aspect of their existence. Crops withered overnight, their fields turning to barren wastelands that yielded nothing but dust. Rivers that once provided clear, life-giving water stagnated, their surfaces covered with an oily sheen, and the air became heavy with the stench of decay. Unnatural phenomena began to plague the hollow. Trees groaned as if in pain, their branches contorting into claw-like shapes. Shadows moved independently of any light, flickering and writhing like living entities. And the faint, eerie sound of distant wailing could be heard at all hours, a spectral lament that pierced the villagers' souls. Those who lingered too long reported strange visions, figures of flame and bone walking among the ruins, and whispers that seemed to come from the very earth beneath their feet. It became clear that Gorath Hollow was no longer a place for the living, but a domain where the boundaries of death and despair reigned supreme. The once thriving village was abandoned, its fields reduced to barren wastelands and its rivers to stagnant pools. The hollow became a place where the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, and whispers of restless spirits filled the air. The Veiled One was bound to the ruins of the shrine, his skeletal frame wreathed in flickering flames that never extinguished. By night, he performed a haunting ritual, gathering the weapons and relics of the fallen to create a circle of burning symbols etched into the ground. These symbols, glowing with unholy energy, acted as a beacon, drawing unwary travelers into the hollow. The tale of the Lost Patrol. A squad of soldiers stationed near Gorath Hollow was dispatched to investigate strange lights emanating from the ruins. They ventured into the hollow, their torches casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. Days later, their mutilated remains were discovered arranged in a grotesque tableau around the shrine. Their dog tags melted into the Veiled One's burning sigils. The Merchant's Caravan. A caravan of merchants, desperate to save time, decided to take a shortcut through the hollow despite the villagers' warnings. Their wagons were later found abandoned, the goods untouched. The air around the scene was thick with the stench of burnt flesh, and the ground was scorched in patterns resembling claw marks. Only one survivor emerged, babbling incoherently about a figure cloaked in fire and shadows who whispered promises of eternal torment. The Scholars' Expedition. A team of historians, led by the ambitious Dr. Althea Quran, sought to study the relics of Elandris and uncover the secrets of the Veiled One's curse. They meticulously documented their findings, describing how the air within the hollow grew hotter as they approached the shrine. The expedition ended in disaster when Dr. Corin attempted to touch one of the relics. A surge of spectral energy engulfed the group, leaving only one survivor who returned with burns etched into their skin in the shape of ancient runes. Legends speak of a way to break the Veiled One's curse and restore balance to Gorath Hollow. Ancient texts recovered from the ruins of nearby monasteries describe the Rite of Atonement as a perilous endeavor, requiring not only immense courage, but a deep understanding of Elandris' sacred teachings. The texts detail that the rite must be performed under a blood moon, when the veil between the realms of life and death is at its weakest. The purified relic, once wielded, must be anointed with the sap of the blackwood tree, a rare plant believed to grow only in the heart of the hollow. Myths also speak of trials set by Elandris herself to test the worthiness of those who dare attempt the rite. These trials are said to manifest as visions of one's greatest fears, designed to break even the strongest of wills. Those who have attempted the rite and failed left behind cryptic accounts carved into the stones of the hollow, their warnings filled with despair. Beware the gaze of fire, for it consumes not the body, but the soul. According to ancient texts, the Shrine of Elandris still holds the key. To sever Kalor's bond to the hollow, a living soul must willingly offer themselves at the shrine, reciting the Rite of Atonement while wielding a purified relic. However, the path to the shrine is fraught with danger. The Veiled One is not the hollow's only guardian. The spirits of Kalor's soldiers, known as the Bound, roam the ruins as spectral sentinels, their eyes burning with the same unholy fire that consumes their master. Those who fail to complete the rite are said to join the Bound, their souls enslaved to the curse. To this day, Gorath Hollow remains a land of despair. Nearby villages regard it with a mix of fear and superstition, sharing whispered tales of the cursed hollow that are passed down through generations. Many refuse to even speak its name, believing it might draw the attention of the Veiled One. To ward off the curse, villagers perform protective rituals during the waning moon. They light rows of candles along their thresholds, scatter salt across doorways, and leave offerings of bread and herbs at the edges of their settlements. Priests chant blessings over the village boundaries, while elders recount stories of those who dared to venture into the hollow and never returned. Despite these precautions, the faint sound of mournful wailing drifting on the wind serves as a chilling reminder that Gorath Hollow's curse still lingers, its shadow stretching far beyond its borders. On moonless nights, travelers claim to see the silhouette of the Veiled One standing amidst the ruins, his skeletal hand outstretched as if beckoning them closer. His flames flicker like dying embers, casting eerie shadows that seem to move with a will of their own. His presence is a constant reminder of the cost of hubris and the eternal price of desecration. No one knows if the Veiled One's curse will ever be lifted, or if Goreth Hollow will remain a scar upon the world's memory. But as long as the flames burn and the whispers of the dead fill the air, the legend of the Veiled One will endure, haunting the hearts of all who hear it. Story 4. The Cursed Healer of Sanghal Woods. In the shadowy depths of Sanghal Woods, where sunlight struggles to pierce the dense canopy and whispers of ancient curses linger in the air, a figure of terror awaits. Known in fearful whispers as Rakan, his glowing eyes and blood-streaked grin are said to haunt the dreams of those who dare even to speak his name. Once a man of mercy, Rakan has become a monster of vengeance, cursed to wander the woods for eternity, leaving a trail of madness and blood in his wake. Long before Sanghal Woods became a place of dread, it was a thriving forest surrounded by villages that depended on its bounty. The villagers lived in harmony with the forest, celebrating its gifts through seasonal festivals and unique traditions. During the spring equinox, they would hold the Festival of Renewal, adorning their homes and streets with garlands of fresh flowers while offering fruits and grains to the forest spirits. Summer brought the Dance of Flames, a vibrant nighttime celebration where villagers lit bonfires and performed intricate dances to honor the forest's protective energy. In autumn, the Harvest Feast united families and friends under the canopy of golden leaves, sharing bountiful meals as a gesture of gratitude. Even in winter, when the forest grew quiet, the villagers practiced the ritual of light, where they placed glowing lanterns along the edges of the woods, symbolizing hope and guidance. These traditions were not merely acts of celebration, but deeply ingrained practices that strengthened their connection to Sanghal Woods, making its eventual fall into darkness all the more tragic. In one such village, Rakan was a revered healer. Clad in simple white robes, he tended to the sick and injured, earning the trust and gratitude of everyone who sought his aid. His remedies were renowned, and some whispered that his hands carried the blessings of the gods themselves. However, no good deed goes unpunished. A rival healer named Vashir, envious of Rakan's growing fame, began to spread vile rumors. He claimed that Rakan's miraculous cures came from forbidden rituals performed in the depths of the woods. Fear and suspicion took root, and the villagers, once so grateful, began to question the man they had trusted. The tension came to a boiling point one fateful night when a child fell ill, and Rakan's remedies failed to save her. Vashir seized the opportunity, accusing Rakan of intentionally causing her death to strengthen his supposed dark powers. Fueled by grief and fear, the villagers turned on Rakan, dragging him from his home and casting him into the woods. His cries of innocence were drowned out by their shouts, and as the torches of the mob faded into the distance, Rakan was left alone in the darkness. Bleeding and broken, Rakan stumbled deeper into Sanghal Woods. The forest, once a source of life and peace, now felt alive with malice. Shadows twisted unnaturally, and the air grew cold and oppressive. At the heart of the woods, Rakan collapsed before an ancient shrine, overgrown with vines and etched with glowing runes pulsating faintly with an otherworldly light. The Shrine of Jorath was said to predate the villages themselves, a relic from an era when the forest was a dominion of shadow and whispers. Legends spoke of Jorath as a deity cast out by the heavens, his power sealed within the shrine by those who feared his wrath. Over time, the forest grew around it, hiding its cursed presence, but the shrine's influence lingered. The runes, written in a forgotten language, were said to bind Jorath's essence while offering immense power to any willing to pay the price. As Rakan's blood touched the shrine's altar, it seemed to awaken, its dark energy pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat, ready to forge a bond born of desperation and vengeance. This was the Shrine of Jorath, an entity of unspeakable power and malevolence. As Rakan's blood seeped into the earth, the shrine seemed to awaken. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the clearing. "You have been cast aside," it said, "betrayed by those you served. Do you seek vengeance?" Rakan, his voice weak but filled with fury, replied, "I seek justice." The voice laughed, a sound that made the trees tremble. "Justice is a lie. I offer power, power to make them suffer as you have suffered. Will you take it?" With nothing left to lose, Rakan agreed. The vines of the shrine twisted around him, embedding themselves into his flesh. His eyes burned with an unnatural light, and his once kind face contorted into a grotesque mask of rage and despair. The transformation was complete. Rakan was no longer a healer. He had become a harbinger of death. Rakan's first act of vengeance was swift and brutal. As he emerged from the shadowy depths of Sanghal Woods, his glowing eyes burned with an intensity that froze the villagers in their tracks. His white healer's robes, now tattered and stained with blood, clung to his grotesquely transformed body. The villagers, who had once trusted him with their lives, could hardly recognize the twisted figure before them. Rakan moved with an unnatural speed, his claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. His first target was Vashir, the man whose envy had set these events into motion. Rakan dragged Vashir screaming into the woods, his voice echoing through the trees long after the man's body disappeared from sight. Those who dared to look found Vashir's remains days later, torn apart and arranged in a macabre display of vengeance, his lifeless eyes wide with terror. The villagers, consumed by panic, barricaded themselves in their homes, but Rakan's fury was relentless. He moved from house to house, his laughter reverberating through the night as he exacted his revenge. Some begged for mercy, their voices trembling with guilt and fear, but Rakan was deaf to their pleas. Each act of vengeance left behind a chilling reminder. Claw marks gouged into walls, symbols drawn in blood, and the lingering sound of his guttural laughter fading into the forest. By dawn, the village was silent, its streets stained with blood and its air heavy with the scent of death. Rakan stood at the edge of the forest, his glowing eyes surveying the destruction he had wrought. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, he retreated into the woods, leaving the villagers to their despair and ensuring that his legend would haunt their memories forever. He returned to the village under the cover of darkness, his glowing eyes piercing the gloom. One by one, he hunted those who had betrayed him. Vashir, the instigator of the mob, was dragged screaming into the woods. His mangled body was found days later, his face frozen in an expression of pure terror. The killings did not stop with Vashir. Rakan's hunger for vengeance had become insatiable, and his curse compelled him to spill blood. The villagers fled, abandoning their homes and leaving the forest to its new master. Sanghal Woods became a place of fear, its once thriving paths now overgrown and silent, save for the occasional scream that echoed through the trees. The tale of Aaron. A young hunter named Aaron ventured into Sanghal Woods in search of game. He returned 3 days later, his hair turned white and his body trembling uncontrollably. "The eyes," he whispered. "They see everything. They know everything." That night, Aaron took his own life, leaving behind a note that read, "He is always watching. The Merchant's Caravan." a group of merchants decided to take a shortcut through Sanghal Woods, ignoring the warnings of the locals. Days later, their wagons were found abandoned, the goods untouched. The ground around the wagons was littered with blood, and claw marks were gouged deep into the wood. Of the merchants, only one survived, raving about a figure with glowing eyes and a voice that promised eternal torment. The priest's blessing. A priest, believing he could banish Rakan's curse, ventured into the woods armed with holy relics and scriptures. The villagers heard him chanting long into the night, but by dawn his voice was replaced by screams. His body was discovered at the village gates, his relics shattered, and his face twisted into a mask of agony. Despite the terror he inspires, some believe that Rakan's curse can be broken. A prophecy, whispered among the bravest of souls, speaks of the heart of Sanghal, a gem hidden deep within the woods. This gem, said to contain the essence of the forest's original spirit, could sever the connection between Rakan and Jorath, freeing him from his torment. However, the path to the heart of Sanghal is fraught with danger. The forest itself seems alive, its trees twisting to block paths with gnarled branches that creak as if whispering secrets to one another. Shadows shift and contort into unsettling forms, resembling figures that seem to reach out with skeletal hands. A faint, sickly sweet smell of decay lingers in the air, mingling with the damp, earthy scent of the forest floor. Whispers, soft yet distinct, drift through the air, carrying fragments of words and chilling laughter that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Travelers report seeing fleeting illusions, paths that vanish as they approach, glowing eyes staring from the darkness, and the faint outlines of figures just beyond their reach. The forest seems to breathe, its presence oppressive and unrelenting, pulling its victims deeper into a labyrinth of despair and madness. And always, Rakan watches, his glowing eyes ever present, his laughter a chilling reminder of the pact that binds him. To this day, Sanghal Woods remains a place of dread. Nearby villages, still haunted by the horrors of Rakan's vengeance, have developed intricate rituals to protect themselves from his wrath. On the eve of the new moon, they gather at the forest's edge, lighting protective lanterns and placing offerings of fruit and herbs in carved wooden bowls. The villagers chant prayers of forgiveness, hoping to appease the restless spirit of the cursed healer. Many refuse to speak Rakan's name aloud, believing that even mentioning him might draw his attention. Superstitions run deep. Children are forbidden from entering the woods, and homes are adorned with talismans made from woven branches and crimson threads, said to ward off his glowing eyes. Despite their precautions, whispers of his laughter carried on the wind remind them that the forest's curse still lingers, and no ritual can truly keep Rakan's vengeance at bay. On moonless nights, villagers claim to see Rakan's glowing eyes staring out from the darkness. His laughter carries on the wind, low and menacing, a harbinger of death. Those who dare to enter the woods often do not return, and those who do are forever changed. Rakan is no longer the healer he once was, but a symbol of betrayal and vengeance. His story serves as a grim reminder that some wounds never heal, and some spirits never rest. And as long as Sanghal Woods remains shrouded in shadow, his curse endures, a haunting presence that ensures the sins of the past are never forgotten. Story 5. The Wailing Guardians of Thornshade Cathedral. High above the jagged cliffs of Thornshade, overlooking a sea that churns endlessly against its rocky base, stands the crumbled remains of Thornshade Cathedral. Time and ruin have turned its once majestic towers into skeletal shadows, but what lies within its walls is far more horrifying than the sight of its decay. The cathedral, once a sanctuary for pilgrims, has become a prison of eternal despair, haunted by spectral entities known as the Wailing Guardians. These spirits, bound by vengeance and anguish, have transformed the cathedral into a place of unspeakable horror. Centuries ago, Thornshade Cathedral stood as a beacon of hope and mercy. The villagers' lives revolved around its towering presence, their days marked by rituals and festivals dedicated to the goddess Alara. Each morning, bells from the cathedral would signal the start of the day, calling farmers to the fields and merchants to the bustling market square. The evenings were filled with communal feasts, where villagers shared stories and songs beneath the warm glow of lanterns. During harvest season, processions of children carried baskets of fruit and grain to the cathedral, offering thanks for Alara's blessings. Weddings, births, and even funerals were occasions of collective celebration or mourning, with the cathedral serving as a constant reminder of the divine connection that bound their lives together. This harmony made the cathedral not only a place of worship, but also the heart of the village, a symbol of unity and hope. Constructed to honor the goddess Alara, the deity of peace and salvation, its towering spires reached toward the heavens, as though yearning for the goddess's eternal light. Pilgrims traveled from distant lands to witness the cathedral's magnificence. The stained glass windows, depicting Alara's blessings, bathed the interior in hues of gold, red, and azure, creating a celestial glow that felt otherworldly. The cathedral's heart was its renowned choir of Alara, a group of singers whose voices were said to carry the goddess's blessings. Their hymns resonated through the cathedral, filling the villagers with a sense of divine protection. Harvests flourished, illnesses vanished, and Thornshade prospered under the choir's sacred songs. It was believed that as long as the choir's voices rang, the village and its people would remain under Alara's grace. This era of peace came to a violent end when the famine-stricken kingdom of Dravenmore set its sights on Thornshade's wealth. King Osric the Ravenous, desperate to feed his starving people, sent his army to plunder the cathedral. Despite the villagers' pleas and the clergy's prayers for mercy, the soldiers stormed Thornshade under the cover of night. The siege was brutal. The soldiers desecrated the sacred grounds, tearing down altars, smashing stained glass windows, and dragging the clergy to their deaths. The choir of Alara sang as the soldiers approached, their voices rising in a desperate hymn meant to summon the goddess's protection. The hymn, known as the Canticle of Light, was said to contain words that spoke directly to Alara, pleading for her mercy and intervention. Its verses were laden with imagery of golden fields, tranquil waters, and unyielding faith, each note carrying a mixture of hope and despair. As their voices echoed through the cathedral's grand halls, a palpable energy filled the air, like the trembling anticipation before a storm. Villagers who survived the siege later recounted how the hymn's crescendo seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the forest, causing the winds to still and the soldiers to falter for a brief moment. Yet, despite their divine plea, the hymn was silenced by the soldiers' brutality, leaving only its final, heart-wrenching note hanging in the air like a broken promise. But the hymn was cut short as the soldiers silenced the choir forever. The cathedral's sacred grounds were stained with blood, and Thornshade's light was extinguished. As the soldiers looted the cathedral, a storm of unnatural fury erupted over Thornshade. Lightning struck the cathedral's spires, and the ground trembled as if the earth itself recoiled at the desecration. Villagers who hid in the surrounding woods claimed they saw ghostly figures rise from the cathedral's ruins, their mournful cries piercing the howling wind. These were the spirits of the choir and clergy, transformed by their untimely deaths and bound to the cathedral by the profane act of sacrilege. The desecration of the holy grounds created a supernatural rift, where the divine energy once imbued in the cathedral collided with the violence and greed of the soldiers. As the choir sang their final hymn, their voices mingled with the rising storm, creating a resonance that bound their souls to the very fabric of the cathedral. The profaned altar, slick with their blood, became a nexus of corruption, twisting their devotion into eternal anguish. Symbolically, their transformation reflected the desecration of their faith. Once instruments of divine mercy, they became instruments of vengeance, their spectral forms forever bearing the marks of their tragic end. Their tattered robes seemed to move as if stirred by an invisible wind, and their eyes, once filled with hope, now glowed with unholy light, a testament to the torment that bound them to Thornshade Cathedral. The Wailing Guardians were born, ethereal beings shrouded in tattered spectral robes, their faces gaunt and pale, their eyes burning with unholy red light. Their once beautiful voices had become anguished wails, carrying both their torment and their fury. By morning, the soldiers who had sacked the cathedral were found dead, their bodies scattered across the grounds. Their faces were contorted in expressions of pure terror, and some were clutching at their ears, as if trying to block out a sound that had driven them to madness. Osric the Ravenous was never seen again. Since that fateful night, Thornshade Cathedral has remained abandoned, shrouded in an aura of dread. The Wailing Guardians are said to haunt its halls, their cries echoing through the empty chambers. Travelers who venture too close report hearing faint hymns carried on the wind, the melodies hauntingly beautiful but laced with an unbearable sadness. Those who dare to enter the cathedral often do not return, and the few who do are forever changed. The curse. The cathedral's curse extends beyond its walls. Crops wither, livestock perish, and storms ravage the nearby villages whenever someone disturbs the sacred grounds. The villagers have come to believe that the Wailing Guardians are not merely spirits of vengeance, but cursed protectors of a desecrated sanctum. They ensure that no mortal may profane it again. The fate of Father Elias. Elias, a devout priest, believed he could cleanse Thornshade Cathedral of its curse. Armed with sacred relics, he entered the ruins under the cover of daylight. Villagers waited anxiously for his return, but as night fell, they heard screams emanating from the cathedral. The next morning, Elias was found wandering the cliffs, his hands clawing at his ears, muttering incoherently. His eyes, once kind and resolute, were now hollow and vacant. He spoke only one sentence before his death: "Their cries will never cease." The Merchant's Folly. A traveling merchant named Gerald Fisk, lured by tales of treasure hidden within the cathedral, entered its halls against the warnings of the villagers. Days later, his body was found at the base of the cliffs, his face frozen in an expression of unspeakable terror. Clutched in his hand was a single silver chalice, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The Scholars' Expedition. A group of historians led by Dr. Miriam Vance sought to uncover the truth behind Thornshade's legend. Their preparations were meticulous. Dr. Vance pored over ancient texts and fragmented accounts, piecing together clues about the cathedral's history. The team equipped themselves with holy relics, protective charms, and recording devices designed to capture spectral phenomena. They ventured into the cathedral just before dusk, their lanterns casting long, flickering shadows across the decrepit walls. As they moved deeper into the ruins, they documented eerie carvings and strange sigils glowing faintly on the stone. Dr. Vance discovered a fragment of what seemed to be the lost hymn of Alara etched into a shattered pillar. But as they attempted to translate it, the air grew thick and cold, and whispers began to echo around them. Their journals and recordings, later recovered, describe escalating terror. Faint footsteps in the distance, an unearthly chorus rising and falling, and a final deafening wail before all went silent. The last entry in Dr. Vance's notebook read, "They sing not for mercy, but for vengeance." They entered the cathedral with journals, recording devices, and artifacts meant to protect them from harm. Only fragments of their recordings were recovered, capturing their descent into madness. Voices pleading for forgiveness, interspersed with blood-curdling screams, filled the tapes. Dr. Vance's journal, found near the altar, contained one cryptic line: "The hymn is not for salvation, but for vengeance." Amid the despair, a prophecy endures. It is said that the curse of Thornshade Cathedral can be broken, but only through a ritual as pure as the desecration was profane. The ritual requires 3 elements: the hymn of Alara, sung in its entirety by a voice untainted by sin; a relic from the cathedral's golden era, blessed by the goddess; and the offering of an unblemished heart, freely given at the altar. Legends claim that the hymn of Alara, lost during the sacking of the cathedral, can still be found in fragments hidden in ancient texts, scattered across distant monasteries and forgotten libraries. Each fragment is said to be protected by both natural and supernatural barriers, such as collapsing crypts, spectral guardians, or intricate puzzles tied to Alara's sacred teachings. One fragment, for instance, is rumored to reside in the Cavern of Echoes, a treacherous cave system known for its disorienting acoustics that drive intruders mad. Another lies buried beneath the ruins of a long-abandoned abbey, its entrance sealed by runes that require an unbroken hymn of faith to unlock. These challenges have deterred many would-be seekers, leaving the hymn's recovery shrouded in mystery and peril. The relic, believed to be a chalice infused with Alara's grace, lies buried deep within the cathedral's crypts, guarded by the wailing guardians themselves. The heart, however, must come from one willing to sacrifice themselves to end the curse. No one has dared to attempt the ritual. The few who have sought the hymn or the relic have either vanished or returned broken, their minds fractured by the horrors of the cathedral. To this day, Thornshade Cathedral remains a place of death and despair. Its ruins stand as a grim reminder of the dangers of greed and sacrilege, a site where the cries of the damned echo eternally. Villagers living near the cliffs warn travelers to stay away, for the wailing guardians are ever watchful, their cries ready to pierce the minds of those who trespass. And on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the sea crashes violently against the cliffs, the villagers swear they can see spectral figures hovering within the cathedral's broken windows. Their glowing eyes and mournful wails serve as a chilling warning. The desecrated ground of Thornshade is no place for the living. Those who ignore the warnings do so at their peril, for once the wailing guardians claim a soul, it is lost forever, trapped in the eternal symphony of despair that haunts Thornshade Cathedral. Story 6. The Harrower and the Bloodthorn Cult. A tale of fear and darkness. In the heart of the Blackthorn Wastes, a forest so twisted that sunlight scarcely reaches the forest floor, lies a tale of unimaginable terror. The villagers in the surrounding regions dare not speak its name, for fear that even a whisper might summon its horrors. Among the trees, shrouded in eternal shadow, dwells the Bloodthorn cult, a sect of dark sorcerers led by the sinister and enigmatic figure known only as the Harrower. Clad in robes stitched from human sinew and bone, the Harrower wields a staff crowned with the skulls of his victims. His skeletal hands glow faintly with runes of ancient power, and his crimson eyes burn with an unholy fire. Beside him lurks his unearthly creation, Zarakith, a demon bound by symbols etched into its leathery skin. Together, they rule the Blackthorn Wastes with an iron grip, their presence a blight on the land. Long ago, the Blackthorn Wastes were a verdant and thriving forest, home to villages that lived in harmony with the goddess Ilarea, the spirit of life and renewal. The villagers lived simple but joyous lives, their days marked by communal gatherings, feasts, and rituals celebrating the changing seasons. Children would play in the meadows, their laughter echoing through the trees, while elders told stories of Ilarea's blessings around evening fires. Houses, built from the sturdy timbers of the forest, were adorned with carvings of flowers, animals, and celestial patterns as offerings to the goddess. The markets were lively, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread, fragrant herbs, and the sweet tang of fruit harvested from the surrounding groves. Every full moon, the villagers would gather at Ilarea's altars to light lanterns and sing hymns, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope and gratitude that resonated deep within the woods. This harmonious way of life stood in stark contrast to the desolation that would later consume the forest. Her altars dotted the forest, adorned with offerings of flowers and fruits, and her blessing ensured fertile lands and bountiful harvests. The villagers believed that as long as they honored Ilarea, the forest would remain a sanctuary of peace and prosperity. Among Ilarea's priests was a man named Kael Morath, a scholar and visionary with an insatiable hunger for knowledge. Unlike his peers, who were content to serve the goddess in humility, Kael sought to transcend his mortal limitations. He believed that true power lay not in submission to the divine, but in mastering the forces of the universe. His ambition led him to the forbidden tomes locked away in Ilaria's sanctuaries, texts that spoke of summoning entities from beyond the veil of reality. Kael's obsession consumed him. One fateful night, under the canopy of withered trees and a blood-red moon, he conducted a forbidden ritual deep within the forest. The air was heavy with the stench of burning herbs and the iron tang of blood as Kael arranged the bodies of captured villagers in a circle around him. He stood at the center, surrounded by candles whose flames flickered unnaturally, as if pulled by an unseen force. Chanting words from an ancient tome, his voice grew guttural and inhuman, the syllables twisting the air into a palpable dread. Each incantation drew energy from the villagers, their screams echoing through the dark as their life force coalesced into a swirling vortex of crimson light. The ground trembled, cracks spreading outward like veins, and with a final piercing cry, Kael slashed his palm and let his blood drip onto the rune-inscribed ground. The portal to the abyss opened, a searing void of darkness from which emerged Zarakith, its monstrous form wreathed in shadow and hunger. The ritual's completion left Kael transformed, his flesh marked by glowing runes, his eyes burning with an unholy fire. Thus, he became the Harrower, a being no longer bound by mortal limitations, but cursed to wield the power he had unleashed. Using the life force of captured villagers as a conduit, Kael tore open a portal to the abyss. What emerged was no benevolent spirit, but a creature of nightmares. Zarakith, a demon of insatiable hunger and malice, promised Kael immortality and dominion in exchange for servitude. Blinded by ambition, Kael accepted and bound Zarakith to himself through a series of runes carved into his flesh. Thus, Kael Morath was no more, and the Harrower was born. With Zarakith at his side, the Harrower unleashed a wave of corruption that spread through the forest like a plague. The once vibrant trees withered into skeletal remains, their branches twisted into grotesque shapes. The air grew thick with a noxious green mist, and the forest floor became a tangled mass of thorns and roots that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The altars of Ilaria were defiled, their sacred symbols replaced with grotesque effigies crafted from bone and sinew. The villagers who once lived in harmony with the forest were enslaved or sacrificed, their blood used to fuel the Harrower's dark magic. Those who resisted were hunted down by Zarakith, their screams echoing through the forest as a grim warning to others. In the heart of the forest, the Harrower established his lair, the Sanctum of Thorns, a towering structure of blackened wood and pulsating flesh. Its walls were inscribed with bloodthorn sigils, runes of immense power that served as conduits for the Harrower's magic. The Sanctum became the center of the Bloodthorn cult's operations, a place where unspeakable rituals were performed under the watchful gaze of their malevolent leader. Over the years, countless tales of terror have emerged from the Blackthorn Wastes, each more horrifying than the last. The disappearance of Edwin Marsh. Edwin was a traveling merchant who sought to take a shortcut through the forest despite numerous warnings. His trail ended abruptly near a clearing where villagers later found his wagon overturned, the goods untouched, but his journal scorched. The final half-burned entry read, "A shadow looms over me, its eyes burn like fire. I cannot escape." The plight of Clara Wynne. Clara, a midwife, vanished after venturing into the forest to aid a distant village. Witnesses reported hearing cries in the wind that sounded like Clara's voice, begging for help. Days later, her shawl was discovered tangled in a thorn bush, stained with blood and etched with strange symbols. The fateful expedition of Garrick's brigade. A group of adventurers, led by the famed warrior Garrick Holt, entered the Blackthorn Wastes to hunt the Harrower. Days turned into weeks with no sign of their return. When a search party finally entered the forest, they found Garrick's armor arranged in a grim tableau, his sword embedded in the ground with a warning scrawled in blood. Leave or be claimed. These tales, among countless others, have solidified the legend of the Blackthorn Wastes and its unrelenting horrors. The tale of Helena Varick. Helena was a healer who ventured into the forest in search of rare herbs to treat a plague that had swept through her village. According to her, the deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to come alive. Vines lashed out at her ankles, and the air grew heavy with whispers in a language she could not understand. She described seeing the Harrower standing at the edge of a glowing circle, chanting in a guttural voice as Zarakith feasted on the life force of a bound victim. Helena fled, but not before the demon's glowing eyes met hers. Though she escaped, she was never the same, plagued by nightmares and hallucinations until her death. The tragedy of Darren Cole. Darren was a mercenary hired to clear the forest for a new trade route. He led a group of seasoned fighters into the Blackthorn Wastes, confident in their ability to handle any danger. They were never seen again. Weeks later, Darren's body was found impaled on a thorn-covered tree at the forest's edge. His chest bore the sigils of the Bloodthorn cult, glowing faintly even in death. The Song of Mira Dell. Mira was a wandering bard who claimed to have been captured by the cult and forced to play music for their rituals. She described a gathering of robed figures chanting as Zarakith emerged from the shadows to claim another victim. Mira escaped during a storm that disrupted the ceremony, but her voice was reduced to a hoarse whisper, and she refused to speak of the horrors she had witnessed again. The Bloodthorn sigils are the source of the Harrower's power. These runes were created during Kael Morath's initial pact with Zarakith, etched into the forest using the blood of his sacrifices and the corrupted essence of Ilaria's once sacred altars. Each sigil represents a fragment of Kael's soul, tethering him to the dark magic of the Abyss and allowing him to manipulate the forest's lifeblood. The symbols, intricate and pulsating with a sickly red glow, are said to embody the duality of creation and destruction, their shapes twisting between familiar patterns and incomprehensible chaos. Villagers who have seen the sigils describe them as mesmerizing and horrifying, as though the runes themselves are alive, whispering promises of power and despair to any who dare approach. These sigils amplify the Harrower's magic, making him nearly invincible within the Blackthorn Wastes, while also serving as prisons for the souls of his victims, eternally binding them to his will. These runes, etched into the trees, stones, and even the very ground of the Blackthorn Wastes, amplify his dark magic and bind the souls of his victims to the forest. Each sigil pulses with a sickly red light, and those who come into contact with them experience vivid hallucinations of their worst fears. Many are driven mad, their minds consumed by the whispers of the damned. Destroying the sigils is said to weaken the Harrower, but doing so is nearly impossible. The sigils are protected by traps, cursed guardians, and the ever-watchful presence of Zarakith. Those who attempt to deface them often meet gruesome ends, their bodies left as warnings to others. Despite the overwhelming darkness, a prophecy speaks of a Redeemer who will rise to challenge the Harrower and cleanse the Blackthorn Wastes. This prophecy, whispered through generations, is said to have originated from the last priestess of Illyria before the goddess's sanctuaries were defiled. The priestess, upon witnessing the desecration of the altars, carved the prophecy into the bark of an ancient oak, its words glowing faintly with Illyria's waning power. Legends tell that the prophecy speaks in riddles, describing the Redeemer as one who carries the light of the fallen and walks unyielding against the shadow. Over centuries, this sacred text has been retold in fragments by hermits and wanderers who claim to have seen the oak tree. Many believe the Redeemer's arrival will be heralded by signs: a sky aflame with red stars, a melody of hope breaking through the whispers of the damned, and the faint return of life to the forest's edge. The myths surrounding this prophecy have fueled both hope and fear, with some daring to seek its truth, while others avoid it, fearing that such hope will awaken the wrath of the Harrower. The Redeemer is said to wield the Lightthorn, a sacred artifact blessed by Illyria herself. Hidden deep within the forest, the Lightthorn is guarded by the remnants of Illyria's faithful, who have vowed to protect it until the Redeemer's arrival. To claim the Lightthorn, the Redeemer must pass trials of faith, courage, and sacrifice, all while resisting the corrupting influence of the Bloodthorn sigils. The final battle, it is said, will take place at the heart of corruption, where the Harrower draws his power from a massive rune carved into the earth. Only by destroying this rune can the curse of the Blackthorn Wastes be lifted. To this day, the Blackthorn Wastes remain a place of unspeakable horror. The Harrower and Zarakith continue their reign, their power growing with each passing year. The forest pulses with malevolence, its shadows alive with the whispers of the damned. Travelers who venture too close often vanish without a trace, their fate sealed by the horrors that dwell within. And as the Bloodthorn sigils glow faintly in the mist, their sinister light serves as a reminder of the forest's dark legacy. Those who enter the Blackthorn Wastes do so at their peril, for once the forest claims a soul, it never lets go. On moonless nights, villagers near the forest's edge swear they can see the Harrower's crimson eyes glowing in the darkness and hear the mournful cries of Zarakith echoing through the trees. The Blackthorn Wastes remain a blight upon the land, a living testament to the dangers of hubris and the price of forbidden knowledge. Story 7. The Drowned Guardians of Eldertide. A tale of eternal vigil. On the jagged, forsaken coast of Eldertide, where the relentless waves crash against the blackened cliffs and the air reeks of salt and decay, the sands bear the weight of a haunting legend. Among the villagers of the surrounding regions, whispers of the drowned guardians echo with terror. These skeletal beings, cloaked in seaweed and shadow, crawl from the depths of the ocean, their bat-like wings and hollow eyes a stark warning to any who dare trespass upon their cursed shore. It is said that their presence heralds death, and those who gaze too long upon the guardians are doomed to share their eternal torment beneath the waves. Long before Eldertide became a place of dread, it was a thriving village nestled along a crescent-shaped bay. The sea provided everything the villagers needed: fish in abundance, trade routes to distant lands, and a deep connection to the goddess Talisera, the ancient protector of the ocean. To honor her, the villagers performed daily rituals at her shrine. Each morning, fishermen would pour the first catch of the day into the sacred tide pool near the shrine, believing it would ensure a safe journey and plentiful harvest. During the full moon, villagers gathered for the Ritual of Lumina, where they released glowing lanterns into the sea, symbolizing their gratitude and prayers for guidance. Children were taught from a young age to sing hymns of Talisera, their voices carrying over the waves at dusk. The shrine itself was adorned with offerings of polished shells, rare corals, and intricate carvings of marine life, all crafted with reverence and care. These practices created a bond between the villagers and the sea, a harmony they believed kept Talisera's blessings flowing. At the heart of the village stood a grand shrine dedicated to her, its alabaster walls glinting in the sunlight. Each year during the spring equinox, the villagers would hold a grand festival, offering the first catch of the season alongside pearls and coral to honor the goddess. These tributes were believed to maintain her favor, ensuring calm seas and plentiful harvests. But such peace could not last. In the years following a devastating storm that wrecked several fishing fleets, tensions rose. Whispers began to spread that the goddess demanded more than simple offerings of pearls and fish. The village elder, Erasmus Greaves, a man known for his ambition and cunning, declared that blood was required to appease Talisera. Erasmus's declaration was met with resistance at first, but desperation soon silenced dissent. The first sacrifice was a foreign sailor who had washed ashore after the storm. Bound and gagged, he was thrown into the churning waves as the villagers prayed for mercy. When the tides returned full and the fish swarmed their nets in unnatural abundance, Erasmus claimed it was proof of the goddess's favor. Over the following years, the sacrifices continued, each one more grotesque than the last. The villagers' reluctance was buried beneath fear and greed, their hands stained with the blood of strangers, and, eventually, their own. Talisera's betrayal. On the 10th year of the sacrifices, Erasmus declared that the goddess now demanded a pure soul to seal the village's prosperity. His niece, Talisera, a young woman known for her kindness and deep faith, was chosen. Bound in ceremonial robes and adorned with coral jewelry, she was led to the shrine atop the cliffs as the villagers gathered below. Her cries for mercy echoed across the bay, but Erasmus stood resolute, his gaze fixed on the horizon. As Talisera was cast into the sea, the sky darkened unnaturally, and the ocean receded far beyond the shore, revealing the skeletal remains of countless sacrifices. The villagers watched in horror as a figure began to rise from the depths. Draped in seaweed and encrusted with barnacles, the towering form of Talisera emerged, her once beautiful face twisted into a mask of rage. The goddess condemned the villagers for their betrayal and desecration. "You have turned my sanctuary into a graveyard of greed," she thundered. With a sweep of her hand, The villagers were dragged into the sea by invisible forces, their screams swallowed by the waves. Erasmus and his closest followers were transformed into skeletal wraiths, their flesh stripped away, their eyes hollowed, and their bodies entwined with seaweed and coral. Talisera cursed them to guard the shore for eternity, ensuring that no one would ever disturb her waters again. The once thriving village of Eldertide was abandoned, its buildings left to rot under the relentless assault of salt and wind. The shrine of Talisera, once a beacon of divine beauty, crumbled, its alabaster walls now blackened and eroded by centuries of neglect. In its prime, the shrine had stood as a testament to the villagers' devotion, its towering spire adorned with intricate carvings of sea creatures and celestial motifs. The entrance had been framed by gleaming pearls and polished coral, while the inner sanctum housed a grand statue of Talisera herself, crafted from shimmering white marble and inlaid with sapphire eyes that seemed to radiate a serene light. Golden mosaics covered the floors, depicting the goddess's blessings pouring forth over the ocean, and incense burners shaped like conch shells filled the air with a soothing aroma of myrrh and salt. Now all that remains is a hollowed ruin, the once smooth walls pitted and scarred by the relentless sea spray, and the sanctum reduced to a shadow of its former glory, littered with fragments of its divine past. To this day, the shoreline is a desolate expanse of jagged rocks and ashen sands, littered with the remnants of shipwrecks and bones washed ashore by the tide. The drowned guardians roam the beach, their skeletal forms crawling from the waves at dusk, their bat-like wings spreading as they emit mournful cries that echo across the cliffs. Travelers who dare venture too close report an unnatural stillness before the guardians emerge. Survivors speak of their glowing eyes, fixated on intruders, and their skeletal hands dragging victims into the surf. The air grows cold, and the scent of decay becomes overwhelming. Even the sea itself seems alive, pulling at those who step too near. Over the centuries, tales of the drowned guardians have spread far and wide, their legend growing with each retelling. One such tale recounts the fate of Isabella Crane, a skilled cartographer determined to map the forsaken coast. She ventured to Eldertide with her tools and unwavering determination, dismissing the warnings of locals. As she worked, the wind carried the faint sound of a dirge-like melody. Her journal, found later amidst the wreckage of her campsite, detailed how the music grew louder as the mist rolled in, bringing with it skeletal forms wreathed in seaweed. Isabella's last entry described a hand gripping her ankle, dragging her toward the crashing waves. Another chilling story tells of Gareth Thorne, a wandering preacher who believed he could banish the curse with prayer and holy relics. Witnesses claimed they saw him standing at the shrine's ruins, raising a silver cross toward the sea as he chanted fervently. The guardians rose from the tide in response, their glowing eyes fixed on Gareth as he continued his prayers. His screams echoed through the night, and by morning, only the shattered cross remained, its surface blackened and twisted. Even simple fishermen have not escaped the wrath of the guardians. Malcolm Rook, a young deckhand, dared to fish near the cursed waters despite the warnings of his elders. When his boat drifted too close to the shore, those watching from afar saw him stand frozen, staring into the mist. Moments later, his boat capsized, and Malcolm was dragged under by unseen forces. The vessel washed ashore days later, its wood covered in deep gouges, as if clawed by skeletal hands. Captain Elias Marrow, a notorious smuggler, sought to use Eldertide's desolate shores as a hidden landing point. Ignoring the warnings of his crew, he anchored his ship near the ruins. As they unloaded their cargo, a thick mist rolled in, and the sound of rustling seaweed filled the air. One by one, the crew vanished into the fog, their screams cutting through the night. Elias's body was later found lashed to the ship's mast, his chest hollowed and his face twisted in terror. Mirabelle, a wandering bard, claimed to have been lured to the shore by a haunting melody. She described seeing two guardians, one crawling on the sand and another rising behind it, their skeletal forms shimmering with seawater. Though she escaped, her songs grew darker, filled with imagery of drowning souls and the cries of the guardians. Mira disappeared years later, her loot found washed ashore among fragments of coral. Even fishermen who steer clear of Eldertide speak of cursed waters. Nets return empty, tangled with seaweed and shards of bone. On nights when the moon is full, strange lights are seen beneath the waves, and the whispers of the dead seem to carry on the wind. Amidst the despair, a prophecy endures. It is said that the curse of Eldertide can be lifted if the fragments of Talisera's shattered shrine are gathered and restored. A pure-hearted soul must then offer an untainted prayer at the shrine, seeking forgiveness for the villagers' sins. The guardians, bound to their eternal vigil, will test any who dare attempt the ritual, their wrath unrelenting. No one has yet dared to undertake this task. The stories of those who attempted to break the curse are etched in whispers and warnings. A brave priest once ventured to the ruins, armed with relics of his faith and a heart full of resolve. But his cries for mercy were drowned by the sound of crashing waves and a haunting melody that emanated from the depths. Another time, a group of adventurers sought to gather the shrine's fragments, only for their remains to wash ashore days later, entangled in seaweed and clutching shards of coral stained with blood. The psychological toll of merely standing near Eldertide's borders has driven many to madness, as the whispers of the guardians seem to burrow into the mind, filling it with visions of drowning and skeletal hands reaching from the abyss. The fear of a fate worse than death keeps even the most courageous from venturing further, leaving the prophecy as an unfulfilled promise shrouded in terror. The fear of the guardians and the ominous presence of the cursed shore have kept even the bravest at bay. Eldertide remains a place of despair, its sands silent save for the rustle of seaweed and the mournful cries of the guardians. To this day, the cursed shore of Eldertide stands as a grim reminder of greed and sacrilege. The drowned guardians remain bound to their eternal vigil, their skeletal forms haunting the sands as they crawl from the waves, forever protecting the waters they once desecrated. Travelers who hear the whispers of the tide and see the glowing eyes in the mist know better than to linger. And on nights when the tide is high and the moonlight dances on the water, the villagers who fled Eldertide swear they can hear the voice of Lysara, singing a mournful lullaby that carries across the cliffs. The melody is hauntingly beautiful, yet filled with an unbearable sorrow, as though each note carries the weight of her betrayal and suffering. Those who hear it describe an overwhelming sense of guilt, as if the song speaks directly to their own hidden sins. The lullaby's echoes seem to wrap around the listeners, drawing forth memories of lost loved ones and broken promises. Some claim the song lures them to the edge of the cliffs, where they stand entranced, staring into the churning waves below. The villagers believe that Lysara's voice is both a lament for the cursed and a warning to the living, a reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal that linger in the air long after her final note fades. Story 8. The Lady of Hollow Vale. A tale of eternal haunting. In the cursed valley of Hollow Vale, where the mist clings to the earth like a shroud, and the air carries an unnatural chill, The villagers whisper of a specter that roams the land. They call her the Lady of Hollow Vale, a ghastly figure wrapped in tattered white, her pale, decaying face frozen in an expression of anguish. Her wide, unblinking eyes gleam like cold fire, and her presence is accompanied by an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint whispers that seem to come from nowhere. The lady is not merely a ghost. She is a curse, a force born of betrayal, vengeance, and unrelenting sorrow. Her story, one of heartbreak and unholy retribution, has haunted the village for generations. Her wrath a dark stain upon the land. Centuries ago, Hollow Vale was a quiet, thriving village surrounded by lush forests and fertile fields. The villagers rose with the first light of dawn, their days filled with the harmonious rhythm of work and tradition. Farmers tended to sprawling fields of wheat and barley, while shepherds guided their flocks through verdant pastures. The marketplace buzzed with life, its stalls overflowing with fresh produce, hand-woven textiles, and the scent of baked bread wafting through the air. Festivals marked the changing of seasons, with villagers gathering beneath lantern-lit trees to sing, dance, and share stories by the fire. Children played in the cobblestone square, their laughter echoing against the stone walls of the Church of the Sacred Willow, a symbol of their unity and faith. Hollow Vale was a haven of peace and prosperity, a community bound by shared joy and trust, until the curse descended, unraveling the fabric of their lives and plunging them into unending despair. Its people were hardworking and devout, their lives centered around the Church of the Sacred Willow, a modest yet beautiful sanctuary at the heart of the village. Among them was Seraphina Greaves, the eldest daughter of the Greaves family, wealthy landowners who were revered and envied in equal measure. Seraphina was a vision of grace and kindness. Her beauty was renowned across the region, but it was her gentle nature that endeared her to the villagers. Unbeknownst to her family, Seraphina had fallen in love with Thomas Dale, a humble miller's son. Their romance, pure and unyielding, was a secret they kept from all, for the Greaves family would never allow such a union. On the night of their planned elopement, Seraphina and Thomas were discovered by her younger brother Edwin, who betrayed them to their father. Furious, Lord Greaves ordered Thomas to be beaten and cast out of the village, warning him never to return. Seraphina, defiant and heartbroken, was dragged back to the family estate and locked in the crypt beneath their mansion. Her family claimed she had fallen gravely ill and passed away, staging a public funeral to cover their crime. But Seraphina was not dead. Not yet. Trapped in the cold, dark crypt, she pounded on the stone walls until her hands bled, the raw flesh scraping against unyielding stone. Her screams echoed endlessly, muffled by the layers of earth above, her voice hoarse from desperation. The air was damp and stale, carrying the scent of decay, and the oppressive silence between her cries pressed on her mind like a suffocating shroud. Hunger gnawed at her, her stomach cramping as days blurred together, and the icy chill of the stone seeped into her bones. As her strength waned, tears streaked down her dirt-streaked face, and her pleas turned from demands for freedom to broken whispers of forgiveness. In the final moments of her torment, rage replaced sorrow. Her hoarse voice cursed the family who betrayed her, the village that ignored her, and the world that allowed her suffering. When her cries finally ceased, the crypt seemed to exhale as if it had absorbed the weight of her pain and fury, leaving only an eerie stillness in its wake. Days turned into weeks, and as her strength waned, so too did her hope. Her final moments were spent cursing her family and the village that had ignored her plight. The Greaves family's lies unraveled years later when the mansion was abandoned following a fire. Workers demolishing the ruins uncovered the crypt and Seraphina's skeletal remains, her fingernails broken and bloody from scratching at the walls. The discovery ignited outrage among the villagers, who stormed the Greaves' graves and desecrated them in vengeance. But their actions only deepened the darkness that had taken root in Hollow Vale. It began with whispers. Soft, mournful voices carried on the wind, calling the names of villagers in the dead of night. Then came the sightings. A pale figure was seen wandering the village, her hollow eyes glinting in the mist. Crops failed, livestock perished, and the once thriving village descended into despair. The villagers realized too late that their desecration of the crypt had awakened something far more sinister than guilt. Serafina had returned, no longer the kind soul they had known, but a vengeful spirit bent on making Hollow Vale suffer as she had. The lady's curse transformed Hollow Vale into a place of perpetual dread. The mist that cloaked the valley thickened until it became an almost tangible force, muffling sound and distorting vision. Strange lights danced within the fog, flickering like ghostly lanterns that lured travelers off safe paths. The once bountiful fields turned barren, their soil ashen and lifeless, while trees twisted unnaturally, their gnarled branches reaching skyward as if in silent agony. Rivers that once sparkled with life ran dark and sluggish, their waters carrying a bitter metallic tang. At night, eerie whispers drifted through the village, voices calling out names in mournful tones that sent chills down spines. Animals refused to enter the valley, and birds that flew over its boundaries fell silent, their songs stifled by the oppressive air. Even the air itself seemed heavier, pressing down on the villagers like an invisible weight, a constant reminder of the curse that had claimed their home. The mist that hung over the valley grew thicker, muffling sound and blurring sight. The once fertile land turned barren, and the village's population dwindled as families fled or fell victim to the lady's wrath. Her appearances became a harbinger of death. Those who saw her were marked, their fates sealed by her chilling gaze. Within days, the marked would hear whispers, urging them to the ruins of the Greaves estate. Those who resisted found no solace, for the whispers followed them, growing louder and more insistent. The marked were eventually discovered dead, their faces twisted in terror, their bodies cold as ice. Over the years, countless tales of the Lady of Hollow Vale have emerged, each more chilling than the last. One account tells of Harold Finch, a carpenter who was haunted by guilt for stealing from the church's offerings. Late one misty night, Harold claimed to hear a woman softly calling his name. The following morning, villagers found him hanging from a tree near the Greaves estate, his face twisted in terror, his tools scattered beneath him. Another legend speaks of Miriam Dane, a healer who dabbled in forbidden remedies. She was seen entering the misty woods after claiming the lady had promised her knowledge to cure all ailments. Days later, her lifeless body was discovered at the edge of the crypt, her hands clutched tightly around a bouquet of blackened flowers that reeked of decay. Then there was Liam Torrance, a young man who sought to prove the lady was a myth. Armed with a torch and a silver dagger, he ventured into the ruins. Witnesses heard his defiant shouts turn into blood-curdling screams. When a search party braved the mist to find him, all they discovered was his dagger embedded in the crypt's door and a trail of blood leading inside. Each story adds a layer to the lady's legend, her presence shaping the very fears of those who dare to speak her name. Edith Marrow, a midwife, claimed to hear a woman's voice calling her name outside her cottage one night. Ignoring the warnings of her neighbors, she stepped outside and vanished into the mist. Her body was found days later in the ruins of the crypt, her hands clawed and bloody as though she had tried to escape. Jonas Farrow, a traveling merchant, laughed off the villagers' warnings and set up camp near the Greaves estate. That night, other travelers heard him screaming, but no one dared to investigate. By morning, his wagon was overturned, his horse missing, and Jonas's body lay in the crypt's doorway, his eyes wide with fear and his mouth filled with dirt. Even children have not been spared. Clara Wren, a 7-year-old girl, went missing after telling her parents about a beautiful lady who sang to her from the woods. Her laughter was heard echoing through the village for weeks after her disappearance. but her body was never found. The villagers have tried everything to rid themselves of the lady's curse. They sought the help of priests, witches, and scholars, but none could banish her. One desperate ritual involved burning Serafina's remains and scattering the ashes, but the fire refused to consume her bones. Instead, the lady appeared that night in the village square, her hollow eyes glowing with fury. The entire family that had performed the ritual was found dead the next morning, their faces contorted in silent screams. In their despair, the villagers turned to a wandering exorcist named Father Aldrich, who claimed he could bind the lady's spirit. Armed with relics blessed by the Church of the Sacred Willow, he entered the crypt alone. Hours passed, and the villagers waited in tense silence. When Aldrich failed to return, a group of men ventured into the crypt. They found his relics scattered on the ground and his body suspended from the ceiling, entangled in thorny vines. The lady's laughter echoed through the crypt, chilling them to the bone. To this day, the Lady of Hollow Vale continues to haunt the village, her presence shaping the rhythm of daily life. The villagers have adapted to a grim existence, their routines dictated by fear and survival. At dawn, they emerge cautiously from their homes, avoiding the mists that linger near the ruins of the Greaves estate. Every door is adorned with iron charms, believed to ward off the lady's wrath, and protective symbols are carved into the wood of windows and thresholds. Each evening, as the sun begins to dip behind the valley, the villagers gather in the church to perform a ritual of protection. They light candles infused with sage and recite prayers passed down through generations, their voices trembling with a mixture of hope and dread. Children are kept indoors, forbidden to even glance out of windows once darkness falls. In the marketplace, merchants refuse to sell their wares after dusk for fear of being caught outside when the lady's whispers begin. Despite these precautions, the villagers live with the constant weight of uncertainty. Livestock often vanish without a trace, their stalls found empty in the morning, and crops rot mysteriously overnight. The whispers, soft at first, grow louder as the mist thickens, seeping into dreams and filling the air with an unshakable sense of doom. Some villagers have resorted to wearing amulets made of bone, believing them to be blessed by the restless spirits who also haunt Hollow Vale, though no one knows if they truly work. The lady's influence reaches into every aspect of their lives, transforming Hollow Vale into a shadow of the vibrant community it once was. Yet the villagers endure, clinging to the fragile hope that one day her curse might be lifted. On misty nights, her pale figure is seen wandering the streets, her whispers luring the unwary to their doom. Travelers passing through Hollow Vale speak of an oppressive silence and an unshakable sense of being watched. Those brave enough to venture near the ruins of the Greaves estate report hearing mournful cries and feeling an icy chill that seeps into their bones. The villagers live in fear, their lives governed by superstitions and rituals meant to ward off the lady. Iron charms hang from every door, and no one dares to venture out after dark. But these measures provide little comfort, for the lady's wrath is unrelenting. Her curse is a reminder that some wounds never heal, and some sins can never be forgiven. One fateful night, a young woman named Evelyn Hart, a descendant of the Greaves family, returned to Hollow Vale, determined to end the curse. Armed with her grandmother's diary, which contained details of Serafina's imprisonment, Evelyn believed she could right the wrongs of her ancestors. She carried a silver locket that had belonged to Serafina, hoping it could appease her restless spirit. Under the light of a pale moon, Evelyn entered the crypt, her lantern casting flickering shadows on the damp walls. She placed the locket on Serafina's remains and whispered a heartfelt apology. For a moment, the air grew still, and Evelyn thought she had succeeded. Then, the whispers began. They rose to a deafening crescendo, and the mist within the crypt thickened, coalescing into the form of the lady. Her hollow eyes burned with unholy light, and her skeletal hands reached for Evelyn. The villagers, watching from a distance, heard Evelyn's final scream before the crypt's entrance collapsed, sealing it forever. The next morning, the mist over Hollow Vale was thicker than ever, and the lady's presence felt stronger. Evelyn's sacrifice had not ended the curse. It had only made the lady more powerful, her wrath more consuming. And so, the legend of the Lady of Hollow Vale continues, a chilling reminder that some spirits cannot be appeased, and some sins are too great to be absolved. Story 9. The Harvester of Crimson Hearts. A tale of eternal hunger. In the cursed ruins of Mordom Hollow, there exists a being of unspeakable horror known only as the Harvester of Crimson Hearts. Cloaked in shadows and draped in tattered black robes, the Harvester's skeletal hands clutch a glowing, pulsating heart that drips with fresh blood. It is said that the heart contains the essence of its victims, their sins and virtues fueling its eternal existence. Legends speak of its origin as a tale of betrayal, greed, and an unholy curse that doomed an entire village to despair. Centuries ago, Mordom Hollow was a thriving village nestled in a lush valley. The villagers lived in harmony with the land, their days filled with the gentle rhythm of pastoral life. The fields were golden with wheat and barley, while orchards bore fruit so abundant that the air often carried the sweet scent of ripened apples. Each morning, the village square bustled with activity as merchants displayed their wares. Jewelry crafted from river stones, hand-woven tapestries, and aromatic spices brought from nearby towns. Families gathered in the evenings to share stories around the hearth, their laughter mingling with the crackle of burning wood. Festivals marked the passing of seasons, celebrated with music, dance, and feasts lit by the glow of lanterns strung from ancient trees. The Temple of Altraxis stood at the heart of the village, its spire a symbol of unity and faith, where villagers offered prayers and shared blessings. It was a place of joy and prosperity, a community bound by trust and tradition, untainted by the darkness that would soon consume it. Its people lived simple but joyful lives, their days marked by seasonal festivals, bountiful harvests, and a deep reverence for the Temple of Altraxis, the god of love and purity. At the heart of the temple was the Crimson Relic, a sacred artifact said to embody Altraxis' divine essence. The relic was a glowing, heart-shaped gem that symbolized the purity of the villagers' devotion. But prosperity bred greed. Lord Castiel Thorn, the nobleman who ruled Mordom Hollow, was a man of unbridled ambition. Burdened by mounting debts and the loss of his family's influence, Castiel sought to claim the relic for himself, believing its divine power could grant him immortality and secure his legacy. On a moonless night, Castiel stormed the temple with his guards, slaughtering the priests who stood in his way. He ripped the Crimson Relic from its pedestal, shattering its protective ward. The villagers awoke to screams and the sight of blood pooling at the temple steps. Castiel, triumphant, ordered the relic to be forged into an amulet and pressed it into his chest, believing he had achieved godhood. But instead of divine power, Castiel's desecration unleashed a terrible curse. His flesh withered, his bones twisted, and his heart burst from his chest, glowing with an unholy light. The Crimson Relic fused with his soul, transforming him into a skeletal wraith, the Harvester of Crimson Hearts. As punishment for their lord's sacrilege, Mordom Hollow was plunged into perpetual twilight, its fields barren and its skies stained crimson. The Harvester roams Mordom Hollow, feeding on the hearts of the living. It is said that it can see into the souls of its victims, weighing their sins and virtues before claiming their essence. The land itself bears the scars of the curse. The rivers run thick with a dark, viscous fluid. The trees twist unnaturally toward the sky, and the wind carries whispers of the harvester's victims. The villagers' lives became a nightmare. No one dared to walk alone after dusk, for the harvester's approach was heralded by the sound of a slow, deliberate heartbeat. Families altered their routines to ensure they were indoors before sunset, locking their doors and covering windows with heavy drapes to block out the crimson light. Rituals became a part of daily life. Children were made to wear small charms fashioned from iron, believed to ward off the harvester's gaze, while elders burned sage and whispered prayers to the lost god Altraxis. In the village square, a lantern was kept burning at all hours, its flame fed with offerings of herbs and salt to create a protective barrier. The villagers avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces, fearing they might glimpse the harvester's hollow eyes staring back at them. Even laughter became rare, as it was said that joy could attract the creature's wrath. Every decision was governed by fear, and their lives revolved around the desperate hope of avoiding the harvester's wrath. Those who heard it knew they were marked. Within moments, the creature would emerge from the mist, its hollow eyes glowing with malevolent light. Its bony hands would plunge into the victim's chest, tearing free their heart, which it would devour while their lifeless body crumpled to the ground. Over the centuries, countless stories have been told of those who encountered the harvester. One such tale is that of Harold Marrow, a traveling merchant who wandered into Mordham Hollow during a blood-red dusk. Desperate for shelter, he ignored the villagers' warnings and set up camp near the temple ruins. That night, his cries echoed across the hollow, and by morning, his wares lay scattered around an empty circle of burned earth. His body was found days later, suspended from the temple's altar, his chest hollowed and his face locked in an expression of unspeakable terror. Another legend tells of Beatrice Lorne, a widowed seamstress who claimed to hear the voices of her deceased family calling from the forest. Convinced they were trapped by the harvester, she ventured into the woods carrying a lantern and a locket containing her daughter's portrait. The villagers found her the next day, kneeling in front of the temple's desecrated altar. Her heart was missing, and the locket lay open at her feet, its glass cracked and smeared with blood. Even fleeting encounters have left their mark. Marcus Greaves, a hunter known for his bravery, returned to the village pale and trembling after a night in the woods. He spoke of hearing a heartbeat so loud it drowned out the wind, and of seeing a shadowy figure clutching a dripping heart in the distance. Though he escaped, Marcus's health rapidly declined, and he succumbed to a mysterious illness within weeks, whispering the harvester's name with his final breath. Each tale is more chilling than the last, a testament to the creature's insatiable hunger. Alara Greaves, a healer burdened by guilt for failing to save a dying child, was found in her garden one morning, her chest hollowed and her hands clutching a crimson rose that dripped with blood. Her husband claimed to have heard her whispering apologies in her sleep the night before, but when he woke, she was gone. Jonas Farrow, a thief who preyed on desperate travelers, believed himself untouchable. One night he attempted to rob the ruins of the temple, scoffing at the villagers' warnings. Hours later, his screams echoed through the hollow. By dawn, his body was discovered impaled on a broken altar, his heart missing and his face frozen in terror. Even children were not spared. Clara Wren, a young girl who wandered too close to the cursed forest, vanished without a trace. Her mother claimed to hear the faint sound of a heartbeat and Clara's laughter interwoven in the wind. Weeks later, Clara's doll was found at the edge of the village, its fabric stained with blood. Desperate to end the curse, the villagers turned to Father Aldrich, a wandering priest whose mysterious past made him both revered and feared. Once a scholar in the grand city of Halveth, Aldrich had dedicated his life to studying forbidden texts and ancient relics. His exile from the clergy came after he was accused of dabbling in rituals that bordered on heresy. Yet his deep knowledge of curses and dark magic made him the villagers' last hope. Haunted by his own failures to save another cursed town years before, Aldrich saw Mortem Hollow as his chance at redemption. His voice carried authority, and his piercing eyes seemed to see into the souls of those who sought his help. The villagers trusted him not because he promised salvation, but because he understood the darkness they faced in a way no one else could. He spoke of the Crimson Relic with a mixture of reverence and dread, claiming it was one of the most powerful artifacts he had ever studied. This mix of fear and wisdom made Aldrich the only person they believed capable of confronting the Harvester. According to Aldrich, the only way to banish the Harvester was to purify the relic by offering a pure soul, a willing sacrifice who would replace the cursed heart with their own. A young woman named Lyra Voss volunteered, believing her untainted spirit could cleanse the relic. Lyra was the last of her family, her parents and siblings having fallen to the Harvester years before. She prepared herself for the ritual, fasting and praying under Aldrich's guidance. On the appointed night, Lyra ascended the steps of the ruined temple, her heart heavy with both fear and resolve. As the Harvester appeared, its skeletal form illuminated by the blood-red moon, Lyra began the incantation. The villagers watched in silence as she placed a ceremonial dagger against her chest. Her final words were a plea for forgiveness, for herself, for the village, and for the cursed soul of Castiel Thorn. With a single motion, she completed the ritual, her life essence flowing into the relic. The Harvester let out an unearthly scream that reverberated through the hollow, shaking the very ground beneath the villagers' feet. Its bony hands clawed desperately at its chest, where the crimson heart began to glow brighter than ever, casting an eerie red light that illuminated the ruins of the temple. The air grew thick with the acrid stench of burning flesh and blood, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. The villagers gasped and clutched each other, their faces pale as they watched the heart pulsate violently before exploding into a cascade of fiery embers. The Harvester's skeletal frame convulsed, its hollow eyes blazing with agony and fury. As the flames consumed the cursed heart, the Harvester let out one final, bone-chilling wail that seemed to pierce into their very souls, leaving an echo that lingered long after the creature collapsed into a pile of ash and charred bone. For a moment, the curse seemed broken. The sky cleared, the air grew still, and the villagers dared to hope. But the peace was fleeting. While Lyra's sacrifice weakened the Harvester, it did not destroy it. The creature retreated into the shadows, its hunger unabated. The land remained cursed, the crimson skies returning within days. The villagers realized that the Harvester could not be destroyed, only delayed. To this day, Mortem Hollow remains a place of despair and death. Travelers who venture too close speak of an oppressive stillness, broken only by the sound of a distant heartbeat. Some claim to see a figure in black, clutching a glowing heart that drips endlessly with blood. Others hear whispers in the wind, promising power and immortality in exchange for their soul. The Harvester of Crimson Hearts is eternal, its hunger insatiable. And as long as greed and betrayal exist in the hearts of men, so too will the Harvester, waiting in the shadows to claim its next victim. Story 10, The Bride of Blackwood Manor. A haunting tale of betrayal and vengeance. Blackwood Manor looms over the desolate woods of Blackwood Hollow, its crumbling spires clawing at the sky like the talons of a dying beast. The surrounding forest is thick with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of distant branches, as if unseen eyes watch from the shadows. A heavy fog clings to the ground, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay, while the air hums with an eerie, almost inaudible vibration that sets nerves on edge. The sky above seems perpetually overcast, casting the manor in a gray, ghostly pallor, and when storms roll in, the howling wind echoes through the hollow, sounding like the mournful wails of the long dead. It is a place where time feels suspended, as though the very land itself is trapped in mourning. The mansion, abandoned for decades, is a monument to decay and despair. Tangled vines choke its facade, and shattered windows gape like the hollow eyes of a corpse. Yet, for all its ruin, the manor's true horror lies within. It is the domain of Eleanor Blackwood, the bride of Blackwood Manor. A spectral figure clad in a tattered wedding gown stained with the remnants of her tragic demise. Her hollow eyes burn with an unearthly light, her face frozen in a mask of sorrow and rage. She's said to roam the halls of the mansion, her mournful cries echoing through its corridors, her ghostly figure glimpsed in the moonlight. The legend of the bride is etched into the fears of Blackwood Hollow, a chilling reminder of love betrayed and vengeance eternal. Long before the mansion became a ruin, Blackwood Manor was a place of grandeur and celebration. The Blackwood family, wealthy landowners, ruled over the hollow with an iron hand, but enjoyed the loyalty of their workers and villagers. Eleanor Blackwood, the family's only daughter, was a beacon of light in an otherwise austere lineage. Her laughter could fill even the coldest rooms of Blackwood Manor, and her compassion extended far beyond the estate's gates. Eleanor often spent her days walking among the villagers, listening to their struggles and offering aid where she could. Children adored her for the stories she told beneath the great willow tree at the village square, while the elders praised her for her kindness and humility, despite her privileged upbringing. Within her family, Eleanor was a source of warmth, though her ideals often clashed with her father's strict views on propriety and power. Her mother, though distant, admired Eleanor's strength of character, but often warned her not to let her heart rule her decisions. This combination of selflessness and quiet defiance made Eleanor beloved by many, but it also left her vulnerable to the betrayal that would shatter her world. Known for her grace and kindness, she was beloved by all, her beauty said to rival the fairest maidens in the land. When Eleanor announced her engagement to Victor Hargrave, a dashing nobleman from a neighboring estate, the village erupted in joy. The wedding was planned as a grand affair, a union that promised prosperity for all. Yet beneath Victor's charming facade lay a heart of greed and malice. He had no love for Eleanor. His eyes were fixed on the Blackwood fortune, a prize he needed to settle his mounting debts and secure his failing reputation. The wedding day arrived, and Blackwood Manor was transformed into a vision of splendor. Guests danced in the grand ballroom beneath glittering chandeliers, the air alive with music and laughter. Eleanor, radiant in her wedding gown, felt a fleeting moment of happiness, unaware of the betrayal that awaited her. As the night deepened, Victor lured Eleanor to the upper balcony under the pretense of a private moment. There, his true intentions were revealed. He demanded the key to the family's vault, his voice sharp and menacing. When Eleanor refused, her heart breaking at his cruelty, Victor's temper flared. In a moment of blind rage, he pushed her from the balcony. Her body struck the stone courtyard below with a sickening thud. Victor fled the scene, weaving a web of lies to the horrified guests, claiming Eleanor had fallen by accident. The celebration turned to mourning, and within days, Eleanor was buried in the family crypt, her untimely death shrouded in deceit. But Eleanor's spirit did not rest. In the weeks following Eleanor's death, Blackwood Manor fell silent, its halls bereft of laughter and life. Servants began reporting unsettling phenomena. Doors creaked open and shut on their own, accompanied by the sound of faint, ghostly whispers. Candles flickered and extinguished as though blown out by unseen breath, and mirrors cracked inexplicably, their fractured surfaces reflecting twisted images of the rooms they once adorned. The air grew colder, even during the height of summer, and a pervasive sense of dread settled over the estate. In the dead of night, the mournful sound of a waltz would echo through the ballroom, the ghostly strains of a violin filling the empty halls. The garden where Eleanor had fallen became overgrown with thorny brambles, and villagers claimed to see a faint figure in white drifting through the ruins, her hollow eyes glowing in the darkness. It was as if the very manor grieved her loss, each shadow and sound a testament to her restless spirit. Servants whispered of strange occurrences, doors slamming shut on their own, phantom footsteps echoing through empty corridors, and a chilling presence that seemed to stalk the halls. The garden where Eleanor had fallen withered, its vibrant flowers replaced by tangled thorns and blackened soil. One night, the matriarch of the Blackwood family awoke to the sound of weeping outside her chamber. When she opened the door, she saw Eleanor standing at the end of the hallway, her gown tattered, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The apparition vanished, leaving behind a trail of icy air and the faint scent of decayed flowers. Terrified, the Blackwood family abandoned the manor, fleeing to distant lands. The villagers, left to their own devices, spoke of the mansion as cursed. Over time, the legend of Eleanor Blackwood's ghost grew, her sorrow and rage transforming her into a vengeful spirit. The mansion became known as Blackwood Manor, a place of fear and death, avoided by all who valued their lives. Over the decades, countless stories have emerged of those who dared to enter Blackwood Manor, each encounter more horrifying than the last. One infamous tale is that of Nathaniel Cray, a treasure hunter lured by the promise of wealth hidden within the manor. Armed with maps and a crowbar, Nathaniel entered the mansion at twilight. Witnesses later recounted hearing the sound of breaking glass and distant footsteps echoing from the ruins. The following morning, a group of villagers found Nathaniel's equipment scattered near the grand staircase. His body was discovered hanging from a chandelier, his face twisted in terror, and his hands clutching a locket bearing Eleanor's initials. Another chilling story tells of Beatrice Morrow, a seamstress who claimed she could commune with spirits. Determined to bring peace to the bride, Beatrice spent an entire evening in the manor, holding seances in the ballroom. She was found the next day in the overgrown garden, her sewing kit spilled across the ground and her fingers bloodied, as though she had tried to stitch something invisible into the air. Her final words, scribbled on a torn piece of fabric, read, "She's not ready to forgive." There is also the account of Oscar Leeds, a former soldier seeking to confront the supernatural. Carrying a pistol and a pocket Bible, he entered the crypt beneath the manor, determined to face Eleanor's spirit. Hours later, villagers heard a single gunshot followed by the sound of wailing that seemed to shake the very ground. When they ventured inside, all they found was Oscar's Bible, the pages torn and scattered, and his pistol, resting atop a stone coffin sealed with fresh thorns. Each account adds to the growing legend of Eleanor Blackwood, painting her as a spirit of both sorrow and unrelenting fury. One such tale is that of Edwin Garrison, a scholar fascinated by the occult. Believing the legend to be mere superstition, he ventured into the manor with a lantern and a journal. Villagers who saw him enter claimed they heard faint sobbing emanating from the mansion throughout the night. By morning, Edwin's journal was discovered on the front steps, its pages filled with frantic scribbles of Eleanor's face and the words, "She watches, she waits." Edwin himself was never found. Another chilling account involves Mary Hale, a local herbalist who sought rare plants rumored to grow in the manor's overgrown garden. She returned pale and trembling, claiming to have seen Eleanor's specter among the ruins. That night, Mary was found dead in her bed, her hands clutching a single black rose that emitted a pungent, rotting odor. Even children have fallen victim to the bride's haunting. Samuel Tate, a curious boy, wandered into the manor on a dare. Hours later, his screams echoed through the hollow, but no one dared to enter the cursed grounds. Samuel's body was discovered the next day in the garden, his face frozen in terror, his mouth filled with dirt. Legends say that Eleanor's spirit remains bound to Blackwood Manor because her body lies in unrest. The family crypt, sealed with a heavy stone door and overgrown with ivy, is said to hold the key to breaking the curse. Some believe that finding Eleanor's wedding ring, lost during her fatal fall, and placing it upon her finger would free her soul. Others insist that the betrayal she suffered runs too deep, and her rage will never be quelled. Treasure hunters and thrill seekers have attempted to uncover the secrets of the crypt, but none have returned. The entrance is said to be guarded by Eleanor herself, her ghostly figure appearing whenever the door is approached. Her hollow voice echoes through the darkness, warning intruders to leave or suffer her wrath. To this day, Blackwood Manor stands as a monument to Eleanor's tragedy. The villagers of Blackwood Hollow live in the shadow of the manor, their daily lives shaped by its ominous presence. At sunrise, elders gather in the village square to light protective lanterns, said to keep Eleanor's spirit at bay. These lanterns burn through the night, their warm glow a stark contrast to the cold, dark path leading to the manor. Superstitions govern much of the villagers' behavior. Children are forbidden to play near the woods, and offerings of fresh flowers and coins are left at the edge of the forest to appease Eleanor's restless soul. Every home is adorned with iron charms and symbols etched into the doors and windows, believed to ward off her gaze. The church bell tolls at sunset each day, signaling the villagers to retreat indoors before darkness falls. Festivals and weddings, once joyous occasions, have become somber affairs held only during daylight hours, for fear of inviting Eleanor's wrath. During stormy nights, when her cries are said to echo across the hollow, families huddle together in silence, whispering prayers to keep her at bay. Blackwood Manor's legend has become a constant companion to the villagers, shaping their traditions, fears, and the rhythm of their lives. On stormy nights, villagers claim to see her figure wandering the grounds, her gown billowing in the wind, her mournful cries piercing the night. Some say she searches for Victor, seeking vengeance for her untimely death, while others believe she mourns the life stolen from her. The mansion remains a place of dread, its crumbling walls hiding the secrets of a love betrayed. Travelers who venture too close speak of an oppressive silence, a suffocating presence that chills them to the bone. Those brave enough to enter often return with stories of cold hands brushing against them, disembodied whispers, and the faint sound of a sorrowful waltz echoing through the halls. And on nights when the moon casts its pale light over the hollow, those who dare to gaze upon the manor's windows might see Eleanor standing there, her hollow eyes staring out into the darkness, forever waiting, forever mourning, forever cursed.